Hi there, I'm Jessica Ayers. I'm the Director of Financial Aid at Palo Alto University. And first, let me say congratulations on your already have graduation or your impending graduation. We're certainly excited for you as you enter this new phase in your life. But before you go, we wanted to spend some time talking to you about student loan repayment. And we hope that this answers any questions that you may have or helps anticipate any questions or concerns that you may have coming down the pipeline. Of course, always know that we're here to help you. Let's go ahead and get started. Today's agenda, we're going to look at several items. We're going to look at we'll kind of begin with the basics just to remind you what the financial aid landscape looks like, what loan servicers are, the basics of student loans, then what repayment plans you have in terms of the options, postponing repayment if for some reason you can't afford to begin repaying your student loans, what happens with either delinquent loans or you default, and the more fun topic, loan discharge, forgiveness, and cancellation. So as a friendly reminder, when we talk about financial aid, it comes from a variety of sources. So while here at PAU, you may have received financial aid from the federal government, from the state government. Some of you may have received Palo Alto University scholarships, or you may have received additional funding from outside entities, like from maybe an employer or a private foundation, or a specific professional organization. So maybe, for example, a parent is a part of a women's business association, that kind of thing. The types of financial aid that you received or may have received while you're here include grants, which is free money that is given and it does not have to be repaid. Traditionally, grants come from either some sort of endowment or the state of California or the Department of Education. You may have received work study monies, which again in review is where you can get a job on campus and earn money to help pay the costs of coming to school. You may have received a scholarship, which is free money that does not have to be repaid, given to you. Merit awards, which are similar to scholarships or fellowships. Of course, student loans, which is what the bulk of what we'll be talking about here, and then parent loans. Both of those, the student loan and parent loans, for most all of you have come from the Department of Education, although we will talk a brief minute about private student loans. So the main difference between those kinds of aid, or the two categories of those two kinds of aid, is what are called gift aid versus self-help aid. So gift aid is essentially aid that's given to you that on behalf of someone else or another organization. So those are things like scholarships, grants, merit awards, etc. Self-help aid is aid that is considered where you're involved in the process. So those are going to be things like student loans or parent loans or the federal work study program. Again, I mentioned most all of you have borrowed with federal loans. There may be one or two students that had private loans, and we will talk about that. What's important here to know is what is your total balance on your student loans, and do you know what that balance is? And a little later, we'll talk about how to check that. So I mentioned that we'll talk just briefly about private student loans. So essentially the main difference between federal student loans and private student loans, of course, is where the money is coming from. Federal loans, you're borrowing money from the Department of Education, whereas private student loans are credit-based loans where a student or a parent is borrowing money directly from a financial institution like Discover, Wells Fargo, for example. Okay, some of those loans those loans offer a variety of products, meaning that they may be variable rates or they could be fixed rates. Sometimes it's origination fee, sometimes not. The interest rate can vary, so it can be anywhere from, I think the lowest I've seen is like 6% up to 18%. It is not subsidized, meaning that as the interest is accruing, you're ultimately responsible for paying that interest. For most students, they need a co-signer. The bummer part about private student loans, at least as it relates to repayment, is that it cannot be consolidated with any of your federal student loans. And they generally do not offer any postponement of payments, which is what forbearance or deferment means. And there is no loan forgiveness. So in terms of managing private student loans, you will manage those directly with the lender in which you borrowed the money from, and they will be able to help you in terms of getting established to repaying that student loan, and you will direct any questions or concerns to them. So earlier I mentioned, do you know the total of your student loans? The Department of Education actually tracks all federal student aid history, but more specifically, your entire federal loan history in a system called NSLDS. It stands for the National Student Loan Data System. And it's a centralized database where it, as I mentioned, stores information about any and all federal grants you had or any and all federal student loans that you had. And so what's nice about it is you can see what your history looks like, when you received this aid, at what institution, how much, etc. The other cool thing about NSLDS is it also tracks your enrollment status. And that becomes important related to student loans. So if you remember, part of qualifying for the federal student loan programs is you had to be enrolled at least half-time. And for undergraduate students at PAU, that's 6 units. And so we actually report that enrollment to the Department of Education. Yes, Jessica is enrolled in at least 6 units, and so she's eligible for student loans. Or no, Jessica is not enrolled at least half-time. She's only enrolled in 3 units, or she's on leave of absence, and so therefore is not eligible for federal student loans. Okay. So, and I apologize, you can get to NSLDS by www.nslds.ed.gov. So you can go directly there. You can also access it if you log into the Federal Student Aid website, which is studentaid.gov, and it gives you a link from there. But if you go directly to the NSLDS website, this is what it looks like. And then if you click on the button that says Financial Aid Review, then you'll be able to review your history. Okay. So you'll hear us talking about what's called your loan servicer. Simply what your loan servicer is the company that has been assigned to manage your student loans after they have been fully dispersed. So what happens is you borrow money from the Department of Education. They send the disbursements to the school. Once the loan is fully dispersed, then they hand that loan over to a company that the Department of Education is contracted with, a private company, and then that private company actually manages the repayment. And so those companies are called loan servicers. So they're not the federal government, but they're contracted by the feds, and so they work on behalf of the federal government. Okay, so they're the ones who you're actually going to be making payments to. They're the ones who you will, if you have to apply for postponement, you will contact them. If you have questions or concerns, they deal with all the customer service issue. Okay, and the way in which you know who your servicer is 2 ways. First, once the loan is fully funded, the servicer sends you notification that the loan has been transferred to them. So you should have been receiving those notifications either via postal mail, but most likely email. And or you can see who your loan servicer is, or loan servicers are on NSLDS. So that's another important thing to be looking at when you go out there. Okay. So just in quick review, there's different kinds of aid programs that you've had or may have had while at PAU. For students who had private student loans, they'll contact the bank in which they borrowed the money from, and they'll be able to help them with the repayment process and repayment plans and any questions or concerns. And then for the rest of us who borrowed federal student loans, you can review your federal student aid history and your enrollment history, and more specifically, the student loan history out at NSLDS. And you can also see who your loan servicer is. Okay. So let's talk about some basics of loans. So there is a wide variety, actually, of federal student loans that are available depending on when you went to school and your institution. For our students, took advantage of or were offered either the direct subsidized loan, the direct unsubsidized loan, or the direct plus loan for parents. Okay. Just so you know, our graduate students also participate in the plus loan, but it's the plus loan for graduate students. We don't participate in the Perkins loan, and the consolidation loan is a loan that you would do separately outside of PAU, but it's another federal loan. Okay, let's talk about how interest works. Okay, there's two things you need to know about interest. The first is if you took an unsubsidized student loan or your parents took a parent loan, those loans are not subsidized by the federal government. So that's why they're considered unsubsidized. And what that means simply is that the federal government is charging you interest that you eventually have to pay on. Okay, the entire loan's deferred while you're in school, as you know, but when the loan goes into repayment, a process of compounding or capitalization of interest is going to occur, and you're responsible for all that interest, including the compound interest or the capitalized interest that happens at repayment. Okay? So what is compounding or capitalization? Essentially what it is they take the total amount of interest that has accrued over the time that you were in school and the time that you were in your grace period, and they take that and they add it to the principal balance, okay? And then what they do is they start charging you interest on that new total. So I think it'll be a little clearer if we do this example. So let's pretend that a student borrows $10,000 of student loan money, okay? That's the amount that was dispersed to the student. So that's the amount borrowed, okay? While they were in school, let's pretend, and through that 6-month grace period, $927 of interest accrued, okay? So what happens at the point that the student goes into repayment or the parent goes into repayment if it's a parent loan? The loan servicer is going to take the amount borrowed, which is called the principal loan amount, which is $10,000. They're going to add to that all the interest that's accrued. So in this case, the $927. So that sum is $10,927. Okay, it's the amount borrowed plus all the interest that's accrued. What happens then is that interest starts accruing on the $10,927. So you end up paying interest on interest, okay? So one of the things that we recommend is that during this 6-month grace period before your loans actually go into repayment, we encourage you to pay as much of the student loan interest that has accrued over the time that you have been in school. Your goal should be to pay off as much of the interest, if not all of the interest, before you actually go into repayment, so that when that capitalization or that compounding of interest formula occurs, if in this same example you borrowed $10,000 but you paid off the $927 worth of interest before the loan went into repayment, then that would be zero. So you take $10,000 plus zero, then your balance is $10,000, and then they only ever charge you interest on that initial amount that you borrowed. Okay? So just remember, the goal here is, in order to prevent yourself from paying interest on interest, to pay as much of the interest that you can during these next 6 months after graduation. Next, the way in which the loan servicer determines how much interest you pay is by a formula called simply daily interest, or simple daily interest. It basically means that it accrues every day. So the formula that is used is that they take the interest rate and divide it by the number of the days in the year, so 365, and then they multiply that by the outstanding principal balance, or in this case, by the outstanding principal balance, okay? So for example, let's pretend that somebody had a $10,000 loan and their interest rate is 4.66%. So they're going to take that interest rate of 4.66%. They're going to divide it by 365 days, because that's the number of days in the year. And then they're going to multiply that by $10,000. Okay. So the amount of interest that accrues every day is $1.27. Okay. Now remember that when that capitalization or compounding of interest accrues, if we used this same example, okay, this particular student borrowed $10,000. At the point they go into repayment, they've accrued $927 worth of interest, and so the new balance is $10,927. So if we're trying to determine how much daily interest is accruing, because the $10,927 is the new outstanding principal balance, you do the same formula. So in this case, it would be 4.66% divided by 365 multiplied by the 10,927 to determine how much interest is accruing on a daily basis. Okay? So the two key takeaways here are to prevent compounding or to minimize compounding or capitalization of interest. Try to pay down as much of the interest that's accrued while you've been in school. Okay? And in order to determine how much interest accrues on a daily basis, you're going to take your interest rate, divide it by 365, and then multiply it by the outstanding principal balance. So just for quick reference, excuse me, I listed the rates for loans for the 18-19 award year. So for this particular year, both the subsidized and unsubsidized loan was 5.05 fixed percent, and then the parent loan was 7%. And as a friendly reminder, for the student loans, the subsidized and unsubsidized loans, those won't actually go into repayment until 6 months after graduation. The idea here is to kind of give you some time to get out and find a job. So for those of you that are graduating in June, early July, you can anticipate late November, December is when those student loans will go into repayment, okay? And then again, just as a friendly reminder, the difference between the subsidized and unsubsidized is unsubsidized means the federal government is not paying for the interest, that you're paying for that interest. And so it's unsubsidized, whereas subsidized means the federal government is subsidizing that loan by paying the interest for you. So when you go into repayment, you get to choose how you want to repay your student loans. It's one of the nice things about the federal student loan process. You know, unlike more traditional loans, car loans, mortgages, credit card, there's only one choice in which you can pay the loan. But here, there's a variety of options to find a repayment plan that works within your budget. Okay, so there's what we call traditional plans and then income-driven repayment plans. Sometimes you'll hear IDR, income-driven repayment. But the traditional plans include standard, the 10-year standard repayment, extended, which means you can extend your repayment period up to 20, 25 years. The graduated repayment, which is like a stair-step plan, and then of course the extended graduated. So the first graduated is on it based on 10 years. The extended graduated means you get longer, the 25 years. And of course the two kinds of consolidation loans. And then, as I mentioned before, there's several different kinds of income-driven repayment, which means it's you per document what your income is, and then based on your income, where you live, number of people in your family, they determine a monthly repayment amount. And there are 4 different kinds of income-driven repayment plans. So let's start with the first one. So when the loan, if you do nothing, then the loan stays in or defaults to the standard repayment plan. Essentially what the standard repayment plan is it takes the total amount that you borrowed and it divides it evenly over the 10-year period and you make equal monthly payments. So in that previous example, if you borrow $10,000, they're going to spread that out over 10 years, which means you have to pay at least $1,000 a year in your principal balance, not including interest. Or take that $10,000 plus interest and divide it by 120, because that's the number of months in 10 years. Okay. The minimum monthly payment is $50. Excuse me. And in terms of overall cost savings, this is the least expensive repayment plan. And the reason is because you pay your loan off the quickest underneath this plan, because you have the same amount that you're paying every month, and you do pay that amount every month, and you do it on or before the 10-year period. And so it tends to be the least expensive over time out of all the repayment programs. Okay. Extended repayment plan, again, I mentioned this before, but essentially if you have debt in excess of a certain amount, then you can extend that time frame from 10 years up to 25 years. So for example, if you have $100,000 in debt, then you could extend your repayment period from 10 years to 25 years, okay? Keep in mind that anytime you extend your repayment period, the overall loan will cost you more, because instead of only paying 10 years of interest, you may pay 12, 15, 20, or 25 years of interest. And so the loan will cost you more in the long term. Okay. Graduated repayment is a stair-step repayment. And essentially what this means is when you first go into repayment, you pay less than what you do at when you pay the loan off in the end or at the end. So let me give you an example that I think better illustrates this. So let's say, for example, when you go into repayment, let's say the first 2 years you pay $50. And then the next 2 years, you're going to pay $75. And the next 2 years, you're going to pay $100. And the next 2 years, you pay $150. Okay, so it's a graduated stair-step repayment. Okay, that the graduated repayment plan can either be on the 10-year standard, so you do a graduated or a stair-step over the 10-year period, or you can do the extended graduated payment, so you can extend it out up to 25 years doing that stair-step approach. Again, remember that this one will cost you more, whether it is the standard graduated or the extended graduated. It's going to cost you more than the basic standard plan. And the reason is because you are paying less of the loan at the beginning, and so interest is still continuing to accrue until you get to a point at the end where you're paying more. Okay, so again, this loan is more expensive than the 10-year standard. Okay, now let's talk about the income-driven repayment plans. I mentioned that there's 4 different kinds. The first one we're going to look at is income-based repayment. It's called IBR for short. And what you need to know about this is they determine your payment based on 15% of your discretionary income. And you'll see that all of these income-driven repayment plans are based on some portion of your discretionary income. So you may ask, what is discretionary income? Essentially what happens is the federal government assumes that there is a certain percentage of the money that you earn that has to go towards your existence. Okay, so for example, if you earned $100,000, they may say, okay, we know at least 30% or 30,000 of that 100,000 is going to go towards housing. We know that 11%, or we assume 11% of that 100,000, so in this case $11,000, is going to go towards healthcare costs, health insurance and healthcare costs, and so on and so forth. So they have a specific formula that they use where they create what are called income protection allowances. So again, it's that amount that they assume or estimate that you'll spend based on your total annual income on those various things to exist or to live. So on housing, transportation, clothing, healthcare expenses, food, etc. Okay, so after they estimate what all those income protected allowance amounts are, the money that is left over is considered your discretionary income. Okay, so in this case, with the income-based repayment plan, your student loan payment are generally 15% of that discretionary income piece. Okay. The nice thing about this income-based repayment, of course, is it's more affordable because it's based on your income. So if you make less money, which may be the case for some of our students that graduate, for example, from the psychology and social action, they may go work in some sort of social service field, which tend to be lower paying. So due to your low income, then your monthly payment will be reduced based on that lower monthly income. Okay. But because you are repaying less of your loan, of course, overall, the loan is more expensive. Okay, so while it may be more affordable on a monthly basis, the longer term picture is it will likely be more expensive because you're paying less per month. Okay. The second kind of income-driven repayment plan is income contingent repayment, ICR. Same as the income-based repayment or the previous repayment plan we just talked about, except for it's based on 20% of your discretionary income. Okay. Again, remember, while it's great because it reduces your monthly payment, again, over the life of the loan, it will likely be more expensive. The next one is called Pay As You Earn. It is the newest income-driven repayment plan, and this one is capped at 10% of your discretionary income. Okay, so now you may ask, what determines whether you qualify for Pay As You Earn, income contingent, or income-based repayment? And that is simply that is based on your total overall annual household income. Okay, and also which one is most advantage, provides the most advantage to you on a monthly basis. So you can actually choose which repayment plan you want to do. So again, if you choose Pay As You Earn, it's only based on 10% of your discretionary income. But remember, that makes the loan that much more expensive in comparison to if you had done, for example, the income contingent repayment, which was based on which was based on 20% of your discretionary income. Okay. So let's look at some examples of how this actually plays out. Okay, so our student Felipe Suave has $22,000 of student loan debt. Okay, and we're going to say that that $22,000 has a fixed interest rate of 4.66%. His income when he graduates is $40,000. He's a single dude and he lives here in the state of California. And the formula to determine what repayment looks like for the income-driven repayment plans assumes that an employee's wages will increase at least 5% per year. And of course, we could have a conversation to determine whether that is actually true or not, or whether your actual net increase is 5% per year. But at any rate, this is what they use in the formula. So again, $22,000 at 4.66%. His income is $40,000. He's single and lives in California. So if we plug those numbers into a repayment calculator, this is kind of what it would look like. So for Felipe, if he did the 10-year standard repayment plan, where they take the $22,000, spread it out over the 10 years, his monthly payment will be $217. After the 10-year period, he will have paid about $4,000 in student loan interest. And so the total amount that he will have paid between what he borrowed and the amount of interest will be about $26,000. Okay, so his student loan payment is $217 per month. He'll have ended up at the end have been paid $25,966 because he paid about $4,000 in interest over that time period. Now, in comparison, if Felipe chooses to do a graduated repayment, meaning he's going to do that stair step where he pays a little less in the beginning and more at the end, then you'll see that his loan is more expensive. So when he graduates, or excuse me, when he goes into repayment after graduation, his initial monthly payment is only $122. By the time he gets to the end of his repayment, that stair step approach will have reached $365 per month, okay? He still pays it off in the 10 years, but you can see the difference in the amount of total interest that he pays. So in the former, where he paid an equal monthly amount over the 10 years, because he paid less in the beginning, he's paying more in overall interest. So for the graduated repayment plan, he would pay $5,255 of interest. And if we add that to the $22,000, then the total amount he will have paid is $27,255. Okay, so again, more expensive. Now, because Felipe only has $22,000 of student loan, I say only, but in comparison to an excess amount of student loan debt, he doesn't qualify for the extended repayment. So the federal government says you don't have enough debt to spread it out up to 15, 20, 25 years. So Felipe has to pay his loan off in 10 years using one of the others, either the standard, the graduated, or the income-based repayments, okay? So for Felipe, he is only eligible due to the his particular job, the amount he earns, and his total debt. He's only eligible to enroll as in the pay-as-you-earn or income contingent. Okay, so you'll see here that his monthly payment at the pay-as-you-earn is less than the 10-year standard, but it is more than the graduated, right? And the same with the income contingent. It is less than the standard repayment, but more than the graduated repayment. However, over the life of the loan, the amount that they pay towards the end of the loan is still less in comparison to graduated and or standard, okay? But again, you will see that over the life of the loan is more expensive. If Felipe chooses pay-as-you-earn, he will have been charged $4,365 in interest, or if he chooses income contingent, he'll have been charged $6,241. Okay. Now you'll also notice that the total time in repayment for the pay-as-you-earn and the income contingent exceeds the 10-year repayment, right? So one of the things we're going to talk about a little later is if you enroll in an income-driven repayment plan and you work in a qualifying organization, you may be eligible for federal loan forgiveness after 10 years. Okay, so in this case, Felipe could have finished paying his loan at the 10-year marker had he met the qualifications for this federal loan forgiveness program, but we'll talk more details about that later. All right. So when you do your exit counseling, which we require all students to do in order to clear for graduation, you will actually be able to play with this financial aid or this repayment calculator. But I'm going to give you the website that this is out so you can go in and put your own numbers in as well. Okay. So the way in which you sign up for your income-driven repayment plan, or as I mentioned, kind of play around with that repayment estimator, is at studentloans.gov or studentaid.gov. And so this is what the page looks like when you get there. You'll log in, you put in your federal student aid username and password, which is the same information that you use to complete the FAFSA application. So here. And then once you get in here, you'll see the repayment estimator over here to the right-hand side. On the left, you'll see you can apply for an income-driven repayment plan. This is also where you complete your exit counseling. It's just towards the top. I only clipped the bottom part, but you'll see that here as well. Okay. So that is repayment plans in a nutshell. The other thing I wanted to share with you is not only do you get to choose your repayment plan, but you can change your repayment plan. So let's say when you graduate, you decide that you want to do the graduated repayment. That's stair step one, so that you pay less now and more later. But in year 5, all of a sudden you're making a lot more money and you can afford to pay more towards your student loan. Then I would recommend you change your repayment plan from graduated to standard. So that way it increases your monthly payment and the likelihood that you'll get it paid off in the 10 years, as well as minimize the interest that is accruing, thereby making the loan cheaper, is beneficial to you. Or let's say you start off in standard repayment, something happens, you can no longer afford that, you go to work for a nonprofit, then you can switch to one of those income-driven repayment plans. So you can change as many times as you want. Okay. All right, but what happens if you need to postpone repayment or something happens after you've already been making payments and you can no longer afford those payments? So there's 2 kinds of ways in which you can postpone payments. One is called deferment and one is called forbearance. The deferment, the difference between the two is deferment means you have to qualify. You have to have a qualifying circumstance to defer your loans. So that means you're unemployed, you have an economic hardship, maybe you're participating in a graduate fellowship, etc. Okay. Whereas forbearance, you don't usually have to qualify for a forbearance. Now they'll ask the reason why you want a forbearance, but generally speaking, there aren't necessarily the same qualifying factors. So these things could be you have an excessive amount of student loan debt. You have specific medical reasons. So for example, you had to have a root canal and you had to pay for that out of pocket. So the money that you were going to use for your student loan payment, you now had to use for your root canal, okay? The other difference between the deferment and the forbearance is deferment is always a postponement of your payments. Forbearance can be either a postponement of your payments for a short period of time, or it can be a reduction in your monthly payment amount. So maybe your monthly payment is $100, but because of that darn root canal, you needed you don't have as much money to pay, and so they're going to reduce your monthly payment to $50 a month for 6 months. Okay, and so that would be a forbearance. Okay. So I guess I got ahead of myself, but again, it allows you to make either postpone making payments, and I think I mentioned before, but most of them have specific time limits, both the deferment and forbearance that you qualify for. And then the other thing that I didn't mention is anytime you are on deferment and or forbearance, any of those unsubsidized loan or parent loans, that interest that accrues will capitalize and compound. Okay, so know that anytime you go back into repayment, that compounding of interest occurs. All right. What happens if you either go delinquent or you totally default on your student loans, or your student loans go eventually into collections? Okay. So what does delinquency mean? Essentially, delinquent loan means that you are late paying your loan payment the first day after it's due. So if my loan payment is due on June 15th, I don't pay it on June 15th, then on June 16th, you become delinquent on the loan. Okay. And immediately when that happens, your loan servicer is going to kick in and enact what are called default prevention activities. So they're going to be doing things like trying to call you, trying to email you, trying to get a hold of, if they don't have correct information from you, trying to get a hold of the institution to see if we have updated information for you. They may reach out to those references that you listed on your promissory note, etc. Okay. The servicers will always try to keep you making payments, at least a minimum monthly payment, because it will save you money in the long term. Now, they will provide you a deferment or a forbearance and work with you maybe to change your repayment plan to make things more affordable. But ultimately, they want you to be making payments, not just because you borrowed the money, but because when you don't make payments, the loan becomes more expensive over the life. Okay. And then eventually, if you don't pay on the loan at all, or you remain in delinquency after 270 days, then the loan goes into default status. Okay. Oops, sorry about that. Okay. So what happens if you go into default? All the big bad things. You're going to be reported to your credit bureaus. You're no longer eligible for any federal student aids, even as a graduate student. And it doesn't matter what institution you go to. All federal aid is put on hold. The loan that the loan that becomes in defaulted status is then due and payable in full. You also lose eligibility to change your repayment plan, and you lose eligibility to apply for deferment or forbearance, which makes sense, right? Because for 270 days, you've had options to do either a deferment or forbearance, and you've done nothing. And so now the loan is in default. The loan servicers will turn over the loan to a collection agency, and the collection agency will begin to try to collect from you. If you're working, your wages will be garnished. And if you are fortunate enough to have any tax refunds, those will be withheld as well. So not good stuff. Okay. You do, once you go into default, have some options to get out of default. I don't want to spend a lot of time here because that's so few of us that happens to, and the collections agency or the loan servicer can help you with this, but just know that there are options to get you out of default once you've gotten there. Of course, they include paying the loan in full, agreeing to consolidate the loan or loans, and then choosing an income-driven repayment plan. You can rehabilitate the loan, or you can make 3 payments and then reconsolidate. Okay, so there are some options. All right. On a more positive note, the good news is that with federal student loans, there are some options to have federal student loans discharged, forgiven, or even canceled. Yay! Okay, so the ways in which these happen is either through death, student death, or parent death, disability, something that's called public service loan forgiveness, and teaching loan forgiveness. Okay, so public service loan forgiveness is the forgiveness program that I mentioned earlier. So essentially the way it works is after 10 years or 120 payments, and now it says qualifying payments. And so what that means is that you have to pay the loan on time. It has to be the full amount. So if your loan payment is $350, you have to pay the $350 on time. You can't pay $200 and have that count. Okay, that's what it means by qualifying payments. So if you do 120 qualifying payments, they are direct loans, which is all you've borrowed through Palo Alto University. You are in an income-driven repayment plan, so that's what it means by qualifying repayment plans. In order to participate in the public service loan forgiveness, you have to be enrolled in one of the income-driven repayment plans, okay? And then the last one is you have to be working at a qualifying organization. And just high level, what it means by qualifying organization is an organization that is considered public service. So that can be like the federal, you work for the federal government or the state government or the county government, right? Or you work for a nonprofit agency. So for example, I work for Palo Alto University. We're a nonprofit public facing institution, right? So if you worked at Palo Alto University, you would work at a qualifying employer, okay? So again, you have to make those payments. You have to do 120 of them. Again, I mentioned earlier, they have to be for the full amount. They have to be on or before or within 15 days of the due date, right? One of the things I didn't mention is it doesn't have to be consecutive. So for example, let's say you get out of school and you work for the city of Palo Alto and you do that for 3 years. And then you go work for a private for-profit hospital, let's say, for example, and you do that for 2 years. So during that 2-year period, you're not clocking any of the 120 payments towards public service loan forgiveness because you're not in a qualifying organization, right? But let's say after the 2 years in that for-profit hospital, you decide to go back to work for the city of Palo Alto. As soon as you go back to the qualifying organization, then it starts clocking time under the public service loan forgiveness again, okay? So it doesn't have to be consecutive. Okay. We mentioned qualifying repayment plans. So the repayment plans that qualify are income driven. We talked about IBR, ICR, pay as you earn. Okay. And the qualifying employer, any government organization, a not-for-profit organizations, and then other not-for-profit organizations that may not have a 501c3 designation. But they do specific things or they address enough of the public to qualify. Okay. So the thing to remember here with public service loan forgiveness is that you need to speak to your servicer about enrolling in the program as soon as you go into repayment. And as a general rule of thumb, you have to have direct loans, which you did if you took loans here at PAU. You have to work in a qualifying organization. You have to be enrolled in an income-driven repayment plan, and you have to be making on-time payments. Okay. Exit counseling. As I mentioned earlier in the presentation, if you took out student loans here at PAU, federal student loans, we require you to be cleared for graduation to complete something that's called exit counseling. So again, you'll log on to studentloans.gov or studentaid.gov. You'll use your username and password, that same one you used for the FAFSA, to complete exit counseling. So this is a screenshot of that page. If you'll see towards the bottom, those light blue, you'll see it says complete exit counseling. So you click directly on that. Here's the login page. You click on complete exit counsel or complete loan counseling, and then you can choose to do entrance or exit. And of course you start your exit counseling. Okay. So there's additional resources for you if you have questions or concerns out at studentaid.gov. And you can see right towards the end, that last box, how do I manage my loans? It's a great resource. It gives you a lot of tips and tricks, but also goes over a lot of the same information that I'm providing you today. The other thing is you can always contact your loan servicer, and they're happy to help navigate choosing a repayment plan, as well as give you information about discharge or loan forgiveness or cancellation. Okay. We talked about it earlier, but just as a friendly reminder, here out at studentaid.gov, under repay your loans, you can do the loan calculator. So you can take your total amount of debt and then put in the interest rates and what your tax filing status is, where you live, and then it will do that chart for you to show you what your repayment would look like under the various repayment plans, so that you can choose the one that's most advantageous to you. Again, your servicer can help you with those choices as well. Okay. And then, of course, you can always contact the Federal Student Aid Information Center. There's their telephone number. I mentioned the website below in terms of studentaid.gov or studentloans.gov, and they'd be happy to help you. Okay. Of course, if you have any questions or concerns, if you would like to do a more in-depth or one-on-one information session, we'd be happy to do that. You can just contact us at our telephone number, which is 650-433-3824, or contact us by email, financialaid@paloaltou.edu. We'd happy to come meet you somewhere, come down to the De Anza campus, or we could do a Zoom or a telephone call, whatever's most convenient for you. I'm certainly hoping that that this information you found valuable and answered some of your questions, and hopefully anticipated some questions that you didn't even know that you had, and that you'll be off to a better start on leaving school in terms of managing your student loans. So thank you for sharing your time today. Again, don't hesitate to reach out, and congratulations again. Take care.